Like the flow state as an artist or as a writer or a painter. Carrie says, or a programmer, the flow state. She says she loves the flow state. Yeah, as a programmer, you could find the flow state as art. I think you could do anything as a flow state. I've heard people say working in a restaurant or working in a kitchen where you can kind of get in a flow state where people kind of just carrying trays, just barely miss each other down narrow hallways because they've done it so many times.
It's true. As a person who works in a restaurant, it becomes like a ballet almost. Like if people are really nimble on their feet, they become hyper aware. And a lot of times you'll hear waiters or anybody in the restaurant industry say, "Man, I hope it's busy tonight because when it's busy, time flies. I look up and it's time to go home."
Yeah.
And that's what happens in the flow state. You're like literally moving from one task to the next with such concentration and rigor that by the time you have come out of it and have a moment to breathe, hours have passed.
Yeah, it's probably fulfilling if you're in a flow state. Because I've heard, but you could work at a restaurant and not hit that flow state and be busy, and it sucks. It'd make the night last forever.
Yeah, there's been a couple of times where I've looked at my watch and go, "Oh my God, it's only been 10 minutes since I last looked at my watch. It seems like I've done so much."
When you get into the flow state, currently we're talking about you can get to a flow state just at a regular work, regular job at a kitchen, but specifically, like, what is the flow state as an artist or as a creative person? Like how do you find the flow state? What is the flow state? What are the pros and the cons, I guess, maybe the flow state? Like first off, like we're explaining, like a flow state is like when you really kind of find your comfort in whatever process you're doing to where you really feel like I'm good at this, I'm on top of it, I'm progressing, I'm moving forward, and there's this little thing that your body does, flow state, but also like a fugue state, where you kind of disconnect a little bit and the work just kind of flows through you. If you're writing, if you're working at a restaurant, or if you're a basketball player, and sometimes when you hit that flow state, it's just like, I don't even have to do the work anymore. It's kind of like you're just funneling the work.
That's
through
what I was
yourself.
going to kind of bring up, right? Because sometimes I don't get into a flow state until I have a clear idea of what it is that I'm trying to communicate. Like, I do a bunch of pre-writing before writing, but whenever all the pre-writing is done and I have a complete picture in my head and I understand a tone or a vibe or where a character is headed or who they are at their core and understand their motivations, so everything I even write is motivated by their want, that's whenever I get excited to write, start writing, and then look up and hours have passed.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to have a bit of a ritual for the flow state to kind of initiate. It's like you're saying, you have to do a specific amount of pre-writing, or if you're a painter, maybe it's like, I gotta have a cup of coffee, a cigarette, my easel, my paint brushes, the right jazz playing, and then boom, I could kind of start to enter my flow state. But the same thing with painting. Like sometimes, to be a little bit contrarian, is like with painting, even though you might have to set up this process, it's not like pre-writing where it's like, I know what I'm going to paint. I might set up my area and then just start rubbing paint on a canvas. And then before I know it, I've been painting for a few hours, like without pre-writing. Because sometimes, like, it's the same thing with, if you're at a restaurant, you don't get to do pre-writing rituals, but like getting to work, greeting your people, putting the apron on, or whatever your job is, there's these little physical rituals that go with.
Well, and then the job of like a restaurant or waiter is repetitious because it's always selling the same food with the same sales pitch and you have the same inventory every day. So in that way, I come to work prepared with knowledge and like I'm able to address like new tables and guests with, with my premeditated knowledge of what they should or could expect from the restaurant.
So there's a bit of a flow state that comes from not necessarily doing something for the first time, but from doing something so often that you have this little methodology, this little preemptive setup before you get to work.
And that way, there's almost like two rituals involved when you phrase it like that.
Well, you have to have, just like anything, is there's probably three rituals. There's probably the preemptive setup, then you launching into the creative work that hopefully pushes you into that flow state, and then the moment we have to come out of the flow state and be like, oh my gosh, it's been 5 hours, where is the time gone? And that's another signifier of the flow state, is like we were talking about, like time moving fast because it feels good to be in a flow state.
I want to ask you about music because sometimes I'll use music to get into a flow state. Sometimes it'll be something as simple as like white noise or binaural beats, or sometimes just lo-fi chill music. But you, as a musician, are creating music. What is it like to create music in a flow state, and how is it different from like writing or putting paint on canvas? Because I find music to be such a big.
But I think it's technically, to me, it feels a lot like the exact same thing. Like before I play music, like a lot of the music I do is improvisation music. So like I do like a lot of improvising jazz and blues, stuff like that. But I think it's the same thing where it's like I need to stretch my hand, I stretch my back, I drink water, make sure I've eaten, I have to plug my guitar in, make sure I'm tuned, everything's set up, my strap is sitting right on my shoulder, my hands are warmed up. I even put a little, like if I'm sweating, when I really get into the zone, when I'm playing guitar, the middle of the show, I'm sweating. My hands get really wet. And that's kind of how I've learned to play in a flow state. So I have to start at a show, first song, I'm not sweating, I'm not in the zone, but I've learned to play with sweaty hands when I'm in the zone. So I spray my guitar down with this spray that makes the neck feel wet.
Huh.
So it gives me that feeling of, okay, I'm in the middle of this already. And maybe that tactile feeling of like the moisture of my fingers, like even though I'm not sweating, it like familiarizes me with, oh, this is what it feels like. And then I kind of just jump in.
So do you think that the flow state is controllable, or it's something that we're always trying to attain? Like if you're trying to like literally recreate the elements to stimulate your brain into going back into the flow state almost as if it's muscle memory.
Yeah.
Because I've also heard people
It
being
is.
like, I go to work and I hope the flow state comes to me, and it doesn't always.
Both. Yes. Both are true.
Mm.
Yes. You have to manipulate it into happening. Sometimes it happens organically, but when you look back, you're like, oh, I did set it up. And now in the future, I see myself having this ritual now. But like the first time you found the ritual, it wasn't a ritual. It was just something that naturally happened. But over time, you might say, dude, I did the ritual and I still didn't get into my flow state tonight. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is. Carrie says in programming, we call it respect the headphones. Programming flow state is not just good, but it's also necessary. You have to keep a lot of stuff in your head, think deeply about how it's all fitting together, and getting interrupted out of that flow state is actually a huge problem. So most programmers know not to interrupt a programmer with headphones on, even if there's no music playing. Great point.
I like that too, and I like having a visual cue for somebody who you share an environment with to know, not now, your do not disturb sign.
Yes, setting up a healthy, clear, not only that, but like a loving boundary for creativity. Say, hey, my loved one, my close friend, my coworker, if I'm lucky enough to find this flow state, leave me there. Let me enjoy it. And when they are in their flow state, let them have that. I think that's a beautiful boundary, not only to set like in your professional life, but also in your personal life.
Yeah.
Not just for creative things, but like everything, like allowing people you care about or people you support to find their little flow states alone and encouraging them to find it and to stay there.
Yeah. It's like a creative DNR. DNR, do not resuscitate. Oh, do not bring me out of this place.
No, let me. I've worked real hard to kind of get into this fugue state. Is usually what I used to call it, like a fugue state where you almost like, Rose said she'd never heard of a flow state. She thinks this is very interesting. Well, as an artist, Rose, as I know you are, you're gonna love this subject. But another term people would say is a fugue state is not attached to the flow state necessarily, but it's a tangential. A fugue state is like when people just go on autopilot, like when you're sleepwalking, you're kind of in a fugue state, not a flow state. A flow state is kind of like the positive.
What has an attachment to the creative process, where a few could be almost medical.
Yeah, it could be like a mental lapse or something like that. And I think that kind of gives us a little details into like the flow state though. Like it's a bit of a way that humans are hacking their own minds
Yeah.
in order to get the best out of themselves. And it's like, I know if I do these few little tricks on myself, that I can put my mind in overdrive. And when I'm in overdrive, I feel good, I feel happy, I feel right in the world. Time moves at a pace that I can't keep up with. And usually the quote is, when you're having fun, time flies.
Yeah.
Being in the flow state is fun, you know. And I think that's gonna I'm gonna round it out. If there's anything else in the chat anybody wants to bring in about the flow state or
Well, I think it
Derek.
would be fun to leave with some like tips and tricks if somebody's like interested in like trying to come away from this segment and go, well, I want to get into the flow state. Like steal from the best. Like, what do you do for your flow state to get? What's your trick to get? Well, we heard about like wetting down your guitar a little bit. We've heard about headphones. I use clamshell, those big AirPod Maxes that are really a noise canceling. I make sure I have a lot of liquid around me so I don't have to get up to hydrate. Like I have a tea, I have an ice water, and I have a coffee, like all right within arm's reach. And I also like binaural beats or white noise that have that are the gamma waves. They're meant for concentration. They're meant to try and help your brain replicate the feeling that you get right before you fall asleep, which is whenever I get a lot of ideas. You know, right when you're trying to fall asleep, you're like, oh, but Tina Fey has a great example of like those little bedtime notes that she makes. She's like, I woke up and I read a note to myself, and it just said, "Everybody's twins." You know, like whatever your idea is, it kind of comes in that wavelength of your brain.
Rose says it's similar to being in the zone. I think it's the same thing as in the zone. It's just a different phrase.
Yeah.
Jamit says some of us with ADHD default to overdrive. That is true, but do you default to flow state? You know, maybe there's a difference between being in overdrive and being in the flow state, or maybe there's just a combination of like, not only was I in the flow state, but I was in overdrive. Or today I was in overdrive, but I didn't quite hit that flow state. You know what I mean? Because I wonder if there's a similarities there. You know, what's up, Scrolly?
Oh yeah, Scrolly's back.
He says get into the zone, auto zone. But yeah, so I think generally what I would leave with is to me, it's like prayer. You know, I don't want to think like literally prayer, but you know, the old world thinking is like you kneel at your foot of your bed to say a prayer. You know, and I think the idea is that there's a familiarity that you need to find the zone.
Yeah.
So, for example, of prayer, if you kneel down at the foot of your bed to pray every night, that familiarity might help you find that zone to speak to God or whatever however you might look at that. But I think the truth there is you need to find that familiarity. Do you sit down at your computer to find your zone? Do you put your headphones on? Is it a cup of coffee? But I think there's that totem, that token, that object, that familiarity that ties you to the flow state, that remembering what it's like to be there. And I think if I can leave anybody with something about the flow state, it's that. What is your totem? What is the familiar object that ties you to the flow state? So when it's time to go back to the upside down, you have this object, it's a cup of coffee,
The location.
you're kneeling at the foot of your bed, whatever it is, that ties you back into that flow state. All right, let me see what we got here in the chat. Scroll hit us with a man begs. The man is not here begging. Jambit says hyperfixation is where you have singular, straightforward, narrow focus that drives you to continue beyond the normal in a specific area. That happens to be doing work that would be classified as a flow state. Yes. Yeah, maybe so. What up, Scrolly? Hi, everyone. Carrie Ann says, oof, that prayer metaphor. I feel like that might be leading into dangerous territory. But Stephen Hassan, the cult deprogramming specialist, he pointed out that a lot of cults use prayer as a thought-stopping technique. And that sounds to me basically like using the flow state for evil instead.
Well, I've always thought that like prayer and meditation are two sides of the same coin.
And I think it's almost like yeah, the flow state, prayer, being in the zone, meditating. I think they're all kind of ways that you hack your brain to kind of get the most out of yourself. And I think what Carrie Ann is kind of like pointing at is that it is a superpower. You're like superpowering your brain, but like Peter Parker learned, you know, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
I think with anything, if you're harnessing your flow state to pray, or if you're harnessing your flow state to make music or art, if you're harnessing your flow state or other people's flow states to create a cult.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's just allowing yourself the ability to giving yourself the freedom and permission to explore your own mind and thoughts without judgment, whatever that means.
Well, sure. And also one thing that we've talked about, and then I want to move on to another subject. We were talking about yesterday, the day before, about success, was that you don't need to just be good at what you're doing. You need to be doing good, you know? And I think that's something that comes from being an artist and being successful, is not only being good at what you're doing, but doing good. You know, like Superman does good. Like, you're doing good for your community, you're doing good for others, you're doing good for other people, you're doing good for yourself. So I think part of being in a flow state is not just being good at what you're doing, but doing good to others as well. All right.
Yeah, that's a good sentiment, then.
All right, we're going to move to a different subject. Scrolly says, I have different rituals for different things, and most of them involve finding a good show to binge. That's fair.